Hello everyone, this is Potatolegion here. I hope you are keeping very well. In this video, I'm going to be giving you all one tip on how to counter every single killer in the game. Every single killer in the game has a unique power, and I'll try my best to give you the best tip on how to counter them. If you want me to go into a more in-depth guide for a particular killer, leave a comment down below to let me know. Let's get straight into this because I have a lot to talk about. So let's start off with the Trapper. The Trapper is a very difficult killer to deal with sometimes, especially if you give the Trapper plenty of time to set up because you don't know where the Trapper's traps are. How a Trapper will normally work is they will try and bring something like Corrupt Intervention at the start and stick to an area to defend because it's much easier to manage your traps in a small area or a free gen. What you need to do as a group of survivors is you need to make sure that you pay attention at the start of the trial where the Trapper started to set up, and if there are generators around that area, you need to get those completed as soon as possible. You do not want to get to 1 gen left or 2 gens left and the Trapper has a really good setup. You need to go in that area even though it's quite dangerous and start disarming some of the traps and try your best to work on the generators. If the Trapper is overly defensive in that area, then you need to, as a group of survivors, tackle those gens separately so you don't free gen yourselves. It's going to be very hard to do, but it's a good way to count a Trapper. So the tip for Trapper here would be to make sure you pay attention to where the Trapper is setting up and deal with those gens in that area as soon as you can so you don't free gen. The next killer on the list is the Wraith. The Wraith is a very fast mobility stealth killer and he can be quite hard to deal with. One tip for the Wraith, however, is if he is chasing you while invisible and you are at a pallet, do not drop that pallet until he fully uncloaks because it takes the Wraith some time to do this, and this will give you plenty of time to either run to the next tile or you can run around the loop and then potentially start looping him while he's uncloaked. Do not drop the pallet straight away while he's cloaked. What you're basically doing is just feeding the Wraith pallets, and the Wraith has so many strong add-ons where he can delete pallets immediately, so make sure you wait for that Wraith to uncloak. One tip for dealing with the Billy is when he is revving his chainsaw near you, make sure you go around an object or a tight corner. It is very hard for the Billy to catch up with you once he starts revving his chainsaw because he has very slow mobility, giving you plenty of time to go around objects to try and avoid this. Try and avoid circular curved objects like a rock loop because good Billies can curve around it. Ideally, you want to go around objects where it's not a circle or a straight L shape because the Billy can curve around it. You want to find a tile where there's little objects sticking out that the HillBilly can bump into, making your life a lot easier to deal with him while you're being chased. Now, one tip for the Nurse, which is going to be very difficult because she's one of the strongest killers in the game, and that is to lose line of sight. It is very important that you make sure that you do not stay in her line of sight because it'll be harder for her to blink to your location. And another little tip, because I'm being generous, just make sure you're just random and weird with your positioning. Don't be too predictable when you go around a corner and you lose line of sight. Maybe wait to see if she's trying to blink through the wall and guess where you're going, and then you can double back. Just be random and make sure that you lose line of sight. One tip for dealing with a Huntress where I see too many survivors make this mistake is to always bait a pallet or a window when dealing with a Huntress. If you immediately drop or immediately vault and she's near you, she will easily hit you with a hatchet. You need to make sure that you bait these things for her to either lift and throw and miss, or for her at a pallet to lift up and you don't drop and you just continue running around the loop. For example, at a single pallet gym, this works really well because she'll lift and you can just run around the loop again because the time she lifts and gets round, you've made it to a safer position. So do not immediately drop against a Huntress. One tip for Myers: when a Myers is in tier 3 and in chase with you, when you go to a window vault, make sure you don't wait around to see if the Myers will vault or not. You don't have a lot of time to make a decision whether or not you need to get to the next tile because of how fast Myers can vault. And a lot of Myers players like to bring Bamboozle or Superior Anatomy. Me, definitely, I love that. So make sure that when the Myers is in tier 3 and coming to a window, you run away and get some distance, because 9 times out of 10 that Myers is probably going to vault because of how fast he can vault in tier 3. So bear that in mind. A big tip for Hag. Now this is what I like to do against the Hag. When you see a Hag in chase with somebody else and you know there's a trap nearby, don't be afraid to actually proc a trap. You'll distract the Hag a lot and she might even accidentally teleport to you. So make sure that when you run into a trap, you're looking directly at it, because this way it won't affect your camera angle, and then immediately run back once you've set it off. If the Hag is chasing someone else and she tries to teleport to a trap, she might accidentally teleport to the one that you set off, throwing her off guard and completely confusing the Hag. I feel like this is a great tip for dealing with Hag. You need to constantly annoy her with her own traps sometimes to buy yourself and your teammates more time to do the gens. One tip for Doctor, make sure you don't pre-drop against a Doctor, especially when he's using his static shock, because you're going to drop that pallet, you're going to take a nice electrocution, he's going to run around to you and hit you on the head. You got to be very, very careful with Doctor because his anti-loop can be quite hard to deal with. When it comes to an unsafe tile, make sure that you wait and bait it out. And if he does shock and start moving around predicting that you're going to drop, obviously you haven't dropped, so then you can loop round again and try and win the tile that way. It's kind of hard to explain, but just do not pre-drop against a Doctor. One tip for dealing with Bubba. Don't pre-drop against a Bubba. You're just gonna delete all of the pallets, especially when he's revving his chainsaw. If you time it right, you can actually stun a Bubba, and this buys you way more time for your team. Sometimes when the Bubba revs his chainsaw, just do a little spin by the pallet and bait it out. If he backs all the way back, start running around the tile and try and get more time out of that pallet. If you just let him eat all of the pallets, when it comes to the late game, he is going to absolutely destroy you. So you have to try and play your pallets with Bubba. I see too many people pre-dropping in a panic. I know he can insta-down, but he's going to kill all of you if you get rid of all of those pallets. So make sure you try and mind game those tiles against a Bubba. One tip for dealing with Freddy, try your very best to work on gens solo. He cannot teleport to every single gen, so make sure that you're split up on generators and forcing his pressure across the entire map, not just on one gen. A lot of Freddys like to bring great slowdown, so if he manages to hook a survivor in a different planet, he can easily still TP back to you and harass you on that gen. But if you're all split up, then it's a lot harder for Freddy to do this. So just bear that in mind. One tip for dealing with Pig. When you're on an unsafe tile and she is crouched, you'll know this because you'll hear her, and her terror radius has disappeared. She's probably going to try and ambush tech you, which means you're going to take a hit at this tile. The second you hear that little squeak of hers, run away from the tile immediately. Get as much distance as you can. Her ambush lunge isn't that long, so hopefully if you've reacted quick enough, you'll get away quick enough. And another tip as well, if the Pig does this once and fails, just be careful at the next tile because she might pretend that she's going to do it, and then when you run away, she uncrouches and hits you. So just be careful and be very reactive against the Pig. One tip for dealing with Clown, try your very best not to pre-drop a pallet. It's very, very, very hard to counter a Clown when it comes to anti-loot because of how his bottles slow you down massively and your visibility is hugely reduced. If the Clown is trying to force you around a pallet because he's throwing a million bottles at you, just remember he hasn't got that many, so sometimes just standing by the pallet and waiting back and forth to see which direction he's trying to hit you from, react, stun him, hopefully the fog is dissipated by that time and then you get some distance. Again, it's really hard to deal with Clown. You're gonna be dropping pallets because you have no other option, but just try and win the mind game that way rather than just trying to run around again. You're gonna take a hit, so sometimes you have to just play the pallet correctly. One tip for dealing with the spirit: you're gonna need a good pair of headphones, I'm afraid. Make sure that you are listening to which direction she's coming from, and if you're at a pallet, you need to pay attention and then be very reactive. It takes a bit of skill to pull this off, so to practice her audio cues, if you have a friend, make sure you go into customs and just have a little bit of a practice going against a spirit and listening for her audio cues. One tip for dealing with Legion. Now, I am a Legion main, so I hope you lot take this very seriously. Just split up. It is very important that you try your very best to stay away from each other. Most maps in this game are too big for Legion to handle, even with Feral Frenzy. If you split up and solo gens, the Legion literally can't do anything. They just become an M1 killer because they can't chain hit their Feral Frenzy. If a Legion can't chain hit, it means their power is basically useless. So try your very best to split up against a Legion. Another tip is try not to always heal against a Legion. I would only heal if a teammate has brought a really good healing perk, or there's a boon on the field and you're being healed by a teammate. Definitely don't run self-care, because you're gonna be taking a lot of Feral Frenzy hits whether you like it or not, and sometimes just focusing on those gens rather than healing all game is gonna get you that win. Legion wants you to heal. It is in Legion's best interest for you to take really slow healing. If you have the means to heal your teammates and yourself quickly, go for it. If you don't, then you don't. If there happens to be a scenario where there's two teammates near you, then get them to heal you very quickly. But don't waste too much time on healing against the Legion. It's gonna hurt you and your team. One tip for dealing with the Plague: only cleanse when it's near endgame or she has her power ready. You really don't want to be going against a Plague injured when she has her ability. She could just wipe the lot of you. It's that powerful. But don't over the top cleanse. So for example, if you hear her power go and you know she's on the other side of the map, don't go run off and cleanse. She's not going to get to you in time. However, if you're nearby and you are in risk of being caught, then quickly cleanse and then get some distance. Just don't over the top cleanse all the time. You're going to be injured. That's just the Plague's mechanic once she gets you sick. But if you cleanse, she's going to have insanely powerful anti-loop and she can demolish an entire team easily with her ability. So just be very careful on when you cleanse. Here's one tip for dealing with Ghostface. If you see a teammate next to you that has just been exposed, but you're not, and you've managed to reveal the Ghostface, don't be afraid to take a hit for that teammate, because if he's got you halfway stalked as well and is saving it for later, if you body block and take a normal N1 hit, it will reset that stalk meter as well, and you would have protected your teammate from an insta-down, buying you as a group as a whole more time. Because if he does decide to commit to you, that's great. Just loop him like normal, and your other teammate can crack on with a generator. So don't be afraid to body block for a teammate against a Ghostface when you're not exposed, and they are. One tip for dealing with the Demogorgon: you need to bait those pallets and windows like any other ranged killer. He can move at 18.4 ms, which is insanely fast when he's shredding at you. So when it comes to a pallet, if you see the Demogorgon about to charge his shred, you got to remember when he is actually charging it, he has slower movement speed. Try and bait it, wait for the demo to maybe back off because they don't want to get stunned, and start to run around the tile. He'll have to cancel his shred to then try and catch up with you, giving you another loop. However, if you drop it early, the demo's going to break it really quickly and then close the gap on you a lot quicker. And of course, less pallets in the trial means your teammates are also going to be in trouble in the late game. So try your very best to bait out those pallets. And if the Demogorgon does go for it and misses, you have the most hilarious bonking animation ever in the entire game, because it's really funny when a demo goes flying forward and whacks his head on a wall. One tip for dealing with the Oni: this is one killer where you really don't want to start taking hits for each other, because the more time you spend in the trial injured, the more powerful this killer gets. So make sure at the start of the trial you try and play relatively safe. Don't drop every single pallet that you see. Just loop as good as you can. Try and win a lot of chases and just waste the Oni's time at the start. This Oni is an M1 killer until they get a free hit. Of course, if they do manage to get their power when you are looping certain tiles, make sure that you're not sort of running in the same direction. If the Oni starts to charge, try and break away from the tile a little bit and force some weird turning angles for the Oni. Remember, when the Oni charges, he sort of curves in the same sort of direction, and it's sort of like a curving movement. So circular tiles, the Oni can easily rush around. So like the Billy, you kind of want to find tiles where it's hard for him to curve around. Easier said than done, I know, but it's your only option against a killer with a really strong ability. One tip for dealing with the Deathslinger: just like any ranged killer, you've got to make sure that you are baiting out your windows, but not your pallets necessarily, because unlike Huntress, the Deathslinger can hit you over a pallet, but he cannot down you at one. So if you're already injured from the Deathslinger, which is probably very likely because the Deathslinger is a very strong anti-loop killer, then don't be afraid to drop that pallet a little bit early if you need to, if you think you're going to take a shot. But just remember, like any other ranged killer, you've got to bait these things and just make the killer miss his shot. One tip for dealing with PyramidHead: this killer has insanely strong anti-loop. And something I like to call the sort of circle tech whenever I play PyramidHead is something that I do to catch survivors off guard through walls. So what you need to do is, when the PyramidHead is circling around, I sort of turn my camera angle to where the survivor is running at the same time, and then I shoot and use my power. As a survivor, when the PyramidHead is doing this, you need to make sure you're paying attention to which way he's facing, especially if you can see over the tile. And then you need to just double back a little bit and be unpredictable and a bit reactive. Remember, when the PyramidHead cancels his power for whatever reason, there's a slight delay, giving you a little bit of time to make up for you doubling back and forth. You need to mind game this killer to beat him. A very good PyramidHead is very hard to beat, so make sure that you are paying attention to the direction that he's facing so you don't get hit through a wall, especially with the circle tech that I just mentioned. One tip for dealing with Blight, and this is to be wary of the butter tech. What the butter tech is this is when the Blight player will rush close to a wall and force the Blight to slide around the tile. This is quite hard to deal with because at certain tiles, the Blight can basically do a full loop around with their ability and still hit you. If you see the Blight trying to pull this off, your best bet is to try and leave the tile for a little bit, throwing the Blight off, and then trying to come back, because the Blight has like 5 to 8 rushes depending on add-ons, and you need to be reactive. It's very, very hard to counter a Blight, but if you see a Blight trying to force themselves into a sliding position, try and get away from where you think they're going to curve around the tile. Again, very hard to pull off, but just make sure you pay attention to a good Blight player trying to do this to you. One tip for dealing with the twins: Victor is very, very fast, but he cannot vault windows. So if you see like an eye wall, for example, don't be afraid to vault it back and forth, and make sure you bait that window before you vault it, because sometimes the twins might go around and try and predict that you're going to vault. So don't be afraid to vault back and forth, and remember, because you're technically not in chase, you can vault that window as many times as you want. So make sure you play long eye wall windows. Try not to drop a pallet on Victor. I feel like that's overkill, to be honest. But if you see a window that has a long stretchy wall, don't be afraid to use it and abuse it. One tip for dealing with the Trickster: never go to a tile where the Trickster can see over it and hit you with their knives. This sounds like a lot of common sense, but the amount of times I've seen survivors overcommit to a tile where I can see over it is insane. So make sure that you take that hit if you are stuck at that tile, to try and get to the next tile where the Trickster can't see over. Otherwise, the Trickster's just an M1 killer at this tile, or if the Trickster's really going to commit to that one knife he might hit you at say a rock tile that he can't see over, it will take him forever to eventually down you, and thus you're buying your teammates plenty of time. So don't be afraid to take a hit at a tile that's weak to get to a stronger tile against a Trickster. One tip for dealing with Nemesis, just like the Trickster, make sure you do not stay at tiles this killer can see over. You're just gonna get absolutely obliterated. So make sure that you take that infection here and try and get to a tile that the Nemesis can't hit over. Unfortunately, you have to sort of treat this killer like any other ranged killer as well. You have to bait those windows, you have to bait those pallets, and try and get the Nemesis to miss his whip. Another little tip as well, if you are infected and you're near death stage on your third hook, don't be afraid to use those vaccines. That's what they're there for, but don't hog all of the vaccines. Make sure that your teammates get some as well, spreading it out, making it harder for the Nemesis to catch everybody. When you're full health, it takes 3 whips to actually down you, which takes a long time for the Nemesis to do, especially if you're holding that W button to get distance. One tip for the Cenobite that I don't see enough of you do whenever I play this killer: can you please just solve the box? If your teammates aren't on it, make sure before it gets to that halfway mark that you're on your way to that box. If the killer is near the box because he's in chase with someone else for whatever reason, just be sneaky and wait for them to leave. Do not make it obvious that you've got the box in front of the Pinhead. If I was a good Pinhead player, the second you pick up that box, if I'm nearby, I am dropping whatever I'm doing. It doesn't matter if that Jane has been BMing me the entire game and I hate her guts. I'm going to stop chase with her to go to you, who is now holding my precious box. So make sure you're smart when you pick it up, but please just do it. Someone has to do it, whether you like it or not. If you don't do it, he is going to absolutely annihilate the lot of you. So make sure you pay attention to that box and make sure you do that box. One tip for dealing with Artist, and she is just an insanely strong anti-loop killer with huge map pressure, so it's really hard to give you an actual useful tip. You just gotta hold that W. When she starts setting up those crows, you need to pay attention to where the next tile is and make sure you get to that tile before she's fully set up. She's really hard to beat, but that's all you can do against a good Artist. I'll give you another tip as well. When she's hooked a survivor and you're on a generator, just pray she hasn't got Dead Man Scourge Hook, because if she does, you know, you're going to be forced to let go regardless. So try, and let's just speak hypothetically like she doesn't. Just try and dodge away from the gen so that you avoid that crow hit. But she's probably bringing Scourge Hook Dead Man, so here's one tip for the Onryo. If you are on a gen and you see a TV nearby and the gen's nearly done, don't be afraid to quickly grab a tape and then complete the gen. The last thing you want is for the Onryo to interrupt you when that gen's about to be done, but just make sure you don't hold on to that tape for too long. And honestly, running to wherever the tape is isn't too difficult, and you'll be rewarded with no condemn as well. And you'll be rewarded with removing a lot of your condemned as well, and you remove a bit of her map pressure too, which is really nice. So don't be afraid to turn off those TVs so you can get your generators done in peace and quiet. Here's one tip for dealing with the Dredge. How the Dredge anti-loops is really simple. He will push you one way, put down his remnant, and then push you back the other way while holding it. When you run too close to the remnant, the Dredge will then TP to it and then hit you very quickly. What you need to do is 2 things. If you're at a tile that has 2 directions that you can loop, just go the other direction away from the remnant. I see too many survivors just continue the same direction and run into it. But if, however, you're at a tile where there's only one direction to run at a loop, then pretend like you're running to it and then bait it back, and then the Dredge will TP hopefully, and then you can get back to that pallet. The Dredge has a really good anti-loop, and this is the only way to counter it. If, however, the Dredge is still holding on to it and you're really close to that remnant, you just gotta take a ballsy decision and run straight at it. When you touch that remnant, it will disappear, making it completely useless for the Dredge to use. So that's how you counter the Dredge's anti-loop. If you do have a tile nearby, however, try and run to that tile if you can while he's holding down his power, because it slows down his movement a fair bit, but just make sure you have that distance. If you don't, unfortunately, you got to follow what I just said. Here's one tip for dealing with Wesker. Just like the Demogorgon, Huntress, and Deathslinger, you need to bait pallets and windows with him, otherwise you are taking a juicy hit. The thing with Wesker is you need to make sure that you run around a corner where he can't rush in that L shape. So you need to make sure that you run in sort of like a U shape, because he can only run twice. So for example, at a jungle gym, it's very easy to do this. Be somewhat unpredictable. And remember, when he is holding his second rush, he has a short window of when he has to rush again, meaning that he can't just hold it round and just catch you. It is literally just an L shape that he can take. So at certain tiles, you can easily get away from Wesker. Here's one tip for dealing with the Knight. Now, the Knight is kind of like Artist. He's a very strong zoning killer, and you have to be very reactive. If you're at a tile and you see the Knight about to use his ability, you need to just leave the tile immediately. There's nothing you can do, because if you do get aggroed with that Knight, you're gonna be taking a hit whether you like it or not. So you gotta run to the next tile and get out of that Knight's summons radius. Bear in mind, the Knight has a very long cooldown until he can use his ability again, so you can loop till normal, and then when you see the Knight summon disappear, just bear in mind he'll be able to use his power again. So, and you just repeat the process. This is how you counter the Knights. It's very easy to do, but I see so many survivors just stay at that tile, waiting for that summon, taking aggro, and then taking a free hit, which is not good. I hope you learned at least one thing, or you can try and apply these tips in your own survivor gameplay. Just keep practicing and trying your very best to be reactive rather than guessing, because a reactive survivor is very strong against a guessing survivor. And what I mean by this is whenever you get to a tile, you react to what the killer is doing, their mind game for example, before making a decision to drop or vault, meaning you just become better in general. So for example, if I'm at a jungle gym and I'm about to vault the window, but I see the killer is going to run past the window and catch me as I'm vaulting, I'll pretend to vault, but I don't actually vault because I've reacted to what they're doing, and then I change direction, winning the chase for a little bit longer. Any of you in the comments below have a tip for any of the killers? Please, let's leave a whole tip section in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. And if you want me to make another video, but for the killers POV, so a killer tip on how to beat survivors for every single killer, I will gladly do that. Hope you've enjoyed this sort of chatty video, and I'll hopefully see you all in the next one. Take care. Peace out.
私の名は吉良義景、年齢33歳、自宅は森王町北東部の別荘地帯にあり、結婚はしていない。